Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Hello, Steffi. Nice to see you again. I see Amanda's there. Good morning. Jenna, good morning to you. Good morning to everyone else. Hi, Anna. I see you there, although I don't see your screen on. I'm going to ask everybody to continue. I'm going to keep pushing this just like Chirag does. Please put your screen on. We can connect as human beings because we can see each other and develop a relationship. So whenever possible, please join us. Thank you. So delighted to be back with everybody again today. We're going to take a step further in this series of conversations that we've been having over the last 3 or 4 calls about creating extraordinary connection with your teammates. Now, Chirag was talking yesterday, for those of you who were on the call yesterday, he was talking about creating experiences, right? Creating events or creating an experience for others through a card you might write or a gift you might give them, something like that. And what he was talking about was creating experiences in other people's lives. And he said 2 things that really relate to the leadership conversation that I want to have with everybody today, even though he wasn't really talking about leadership per se. If you were on the call, maybe you heard him. He said, first, obsess over the experience of the people. Obsess over the experience of the people, right? That's not a hard concept to grasp when you're thinking about how you can serve your clients. You want their experience to be one of absolute perfection, right? And you do anything you can to have them have that experience. But what about your teammates? Are you willing, do you naturally bring the same level of commitment and desire to making their experience absolutely impeccable as well? If not, you might be leaving some money on the table. You might be actually hurting the business without even knowing about it. The second thing he said was, make them feel like they're more than just a transaction. A great piece of advice for all of us when serving clients, and just as valid when we're working with teammates. Whether it's clients, teammates, former clients, the person you're married to, in all these cases, we have the opportunity to make that person feel like they're more than just a transaction. But do we always do that? There's a lot of ways for us to have someone have an extraordinary experience of us. We need to remember that the core of our business is the relationships that are around us, right? Your business depends on the relationships that you have with your teammates and the relationships that you and your teammates have with your clients. That is the core of your business. That is the prime determiner of the success that you're going to experience. So we're going to talk today. I'd like to give you some tools that maybe can help you to create an extraordinary experience with your teammates so that they feel that they are more than just a transaction. Tools, skills, mindsets that you can apply so that they can have an extraordinary experience of you. So let me start by asking a question. I'll ask you to put something into the chat here. The question is this: have you ever had an experience with a staff member, or let's say a client, where the conversation wasn't going very well? Maybe there was something that was a difficult situation. It was a little bit sticky or complicated. And in the midst of the conversation, one of you, maybe the other, got a little bit upset about it. Maybe you got a little hot. Maybe you got a little frustrated. Maybe you got a little, someone got a little bit defensive. If you've ever had that experience, please put yes into the chat box. All right, as I expected, pretty much all of us must have had many of these experiences throughout the course of our lives, business lives and personal lives. The question is, do we want to keep doing that? For most of us, the answer to that question is no. The more important question is, so how do I do that? How can I apply some tools or approaches or maybe a different mindset that will help me avoid those situations in the future? You may think that it's inevitable to have conflict with people and it's inevitable to have arguments with people, because that's what your life experience has been. But the reality is it doesn't have to be that way. And the proof, of course, is right there in front of you, where with those really good relationships that you do have, you can somehow navigate through the difficult conversations without so much of that stuff happening. So what I'd like to talk about today is this concept of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is a set of tools and perspectives that you can think of as collectively a kind of people smarts, a way of thinking about and interacting with others in a way that tends to create strong connection, tends to avoid the feelings of rejection and judgment and defensiveness and all the things that we typically experience from time to time. So I'm going to share a few things with you today, and my hope is that by the end, you'll have one tool, one mindset, one concept that you can apply next time you have a situation like this that might help you navigate it a little bit more smoothly. I should say that emotional intelligence is a big topic, and there's a lot of pieces to it. I'm going to just throw out a couple of fundamental parts to it today. And I suggest that if you're interested in this topic and you're interested in having extraordinarily effective relationships with your teammates, that you kind of put this in the back of your mind as something to develop your skills around going forwards. Yes, it's important to do lead gen. Yes, it's important to have negotiation skills, but ultimately nothing more is more important than having relating skills. And obviously emotion is a big part of that. As human beings, emotions are part of our biological architecture. They're part of how we experience the world around us. And there are ways for us to manage them in ways that work for us rather than against us. I see that Amanda's mentioning Chris Voss's work here. There's a lot of books out there in emotional intelligence. I'll suggest that you just Google a few articles first after today and just read through a few articles and see what else you find in there that's something that you can hold on to in the challenging situations that you know you're going to have in the future with clients and or team members. So let me pull up a couple of slides. I'll take you through some things. And if we have a little time after that, I'd be happy to answer a couple of questions about it and or maybe do a role play with somebody. So let me pull this up. Is there we go. Okay, managing relationships with emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence, as I said, is a whole set of skills and perspectives that you can apply in any situation to manage a relationship effectively. So let's first just make one kind of observation about relationships. And this is something that I hope you'll write down and think about in the future. People connect deeply as humans through feeling, not through thought. That is, when you think about what is it that ties army buddies who were in the army when they were in their 20s and they stick together until their 70s and their 80s. It's because they went through such a harrowing experience together where they experienced fear and joy and relief and lots of other terrible things that tie them together for life. Why is it that people who have been married for 60 or 70 years and are lucky to have that feeling of comfort and happiness that comes from knowing that they weathered the storm of all of those, issues? Oh, hold on a minute. Seeing two halves here. Let me see if I can, that's weird. Do you see one thing there? You see one particular slide now? Good now. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Okay, great. So, what is it that ties people together? It's not just the fact that they experience things together. It's that they experienced feelings together. And so I want you to understand that we tend to think that people are connected because they know each other and they think the same way. But actually what ties people deeply together are shared experiences of feeling. And so if you've been married to somebody for 50 years and you have that warm contentment to say that, you know what, we've done it our way. We've been through the hard times. We went through the lean times. We raised the kids. We went through the time the house burned down. All the experiences the emotional experiences that come along with those things are the things that we share. And so we really want to focus, at least for today, on this experience of being a human being through how we feel. So what is emotional intelligence? Well, there's a lot of ways to define it. I'm going to throw out a simple definition for us here that has three parts to it. The ability to consistently perceive, understand, and manage emotions intelligently in relationships. And the three parts there: perceiving is about understanding that an emotional experience is part of what's happening to us right here, right now. Understanding it is having a sensibility that allows us to define what the nature of that experience is and distinguish a particular experience from another. And third is about managing the emotions effectively. This understanding part is really important because, for example, in America, we tend to have a very simplistic way of communicating what we experience emotionally. We tend to use two words overwhelmingly. When we're upset about something, we say, I'm upset or I'm stressed. Those are the only two words we use. Now, they might be pretty good at indicating to somebody else that something is not right for us in the moment, but it doesn't really go very far to explain what is the nature of our difficulty. And this is a big piece of emotional intelligence. We want to bring a much more nuanced and useful vocabulary to the experience that we're having than simply I'm stressed or I'm upset. And I'll give that vocabulary to you in just a moment. Emotional intelligence has 4 parts. First 2 parts are about perceiving and understanding, which was in the definition on the previous slide. How do we perceive and understand what's happening to us at a given moment in time? And how do we do so with the other person that we might be relating with? And secondly, when there are powerful emotions that are present and may influence how we might respond to something, how do we manage those emotions in ourselves? And how do we help manage them in another? If you think there's nothing we can do to manage someone else's emotions or influence someone else's emotions, you're wrong. And you're probably missing an opportunity to create deeper connection. So we'll talk about that a little bit today. So one important part about emotional intelligence is the ability to distinguish between a thought and a feeling. That is, if we don't have a clear distinction in our mind between what we're thinking and what we're feeling, then in a sense, we're not being very intelligent about what's going on inside our mind. Does that make sense? So if I ask you, what's the difference between a thought and a feeling, you might say, well, I'm not really sure. And part of the problem here is in American English, we have a way of voicing things or phrasing things that actually blurs the difference between thought and feeling. For example, if I asked, if I knew that Jenna was laid off in the middle of COVID, right? She was working on a particular job and she got laid off with 1,000 other people. And I'd say, hey, Jenna, how do you feel about getting laid off, in the middle of COVID like that? I know you had 2 young kids and you had one older kid who was going to college. And how'd that feel? You might say, you know what? I really felt betrayed because I'd put in 25 years in that particular company and they said that they wanted me for life. And they had just told me half a year before that I was one of the most employees ever. And they just threw me out on the street with everybody else, and I knew that if layoffs were going to come, that, I was going to be one who actually didn't get laid off. So I felt really betrayed and cheated by them. Well, here's the point, folks. The person may have said, I felt betrayed and cheated, but actually those aren't feelings. Those are thoughts. And this is the distinction we want to make here. A thought is something around reason, interpretation, cognition, analysis, all the stuff that happens in the prefrontal cortex of our brain, as opposed to an emotion, which the scientists, social scientists, biologists, and psychologists recognize is a sensation or an experience. It's a physical and mental experience at the same time. So, for example, when you get nervous, if you have to speak in front of a large group or you have a big exam, you might get butterflies in your stomach, or you might, get sweaty, or you might be clenching your fists. These are physical responses to an emotional experience that we're having. And so it's important for you to recognize that thoughts and feelings are different. And to be emotionally intelligent, we need to be able to distinguish the thoughts from the feelings. In any given situation, it's likely that you'll have certain thoughts and you'll have certain feelings. But to be able to perceive and understand what's happening for you, we need to separate those. So this is one important element of emotional intelligence, is the ability to distinguish between a thought and a feeling. So a couple of things. One thing to think about in using emotional intelligence is you need to perceive and understand the emotions being experienced by you and the other, hopefully right in real time. Like you're able to say, okay, this is what's coming up for me, or this is what's coming up for the other person, I believe. If not, certainly you can reflect on it later and think later on about what was coming up for you. But what we need is a nuanced vocabulary to be able to understand what's really happening to us. And I want to give you that vocabulary right now. This chart represents 6 categories of emotional experience. Now, there's a lot of disagreement out there among psychologists and biologists, neurobiologists, and others about what actually an emotion is. And there's the Yale feeling chart and other things that are out there that list all kinds of things. But most of the scientists agree that there's 6 fundamental emotions. And the reason that they agree on these is because each of these has a physical response to a situation that's highly predictable and seems to be universal across all cultures. For example, happiness. Most people express happiness through a smile. And while some people may smile more than others, every culture in the world has smiling as some part of it. We can understand what an angry face might look like. We can understand what a fearful experience might be. If someone's extremely scared or shocked, they might open up their eyes quite broadly. Their mouth might be open. They might have butterflies, nausea in their stomach. They might have sweatiness. They might have sweaty palms. They might have a headache, right? All these things are typical of the fear response or the fear experience or sensation. And so these 6 things are the general emotions that everyone seems to agree on, at least as far as the basic human architecture of emotion. Now, out of these 6, there's really only 2 that you need to think about. Always focus on anger and fear. When you're interacting with another, whether it's a teammate, whether it's a client, whether it's a vendor, whether it's a significant other in your life, the thing that you really want to tune your antenna to is someone experiencing anger right now? Is someone experiencing fear? And here's one more thing to think about. Anger is what we call a secondary emotion. Almost always underneath anger is fear. For example, if you see the mother who sees her 4-year-old child run out into the middle of the street after the ball, what does the mother say to the child? How many times have I told you not to run out on the street after the ball? I've told you 100 times. Don't you know you could be killed? Right? She looks angry, but is she really angry? No, she's fearful, right? She's having an experience of fear. She's having a thought that if my child runs out without looking, my child could die. The fear is I lose my child, right? I'll be childless. And so what often comes out is anger, but what we're really experiencing is fear. And here's a big part of emotional intelligence, is to recognize that underneath anger is fear 95% of the time. And this is why you need to look at both anger and fear. These are the ones that most strongly predict the things like defensiveness, yelling and screaming, saying things you later regret. If I go back to the chart again, I've highlighted a couple of things here under those 2 categories. The words that you should be thinking about, or the behaviors you should be looking at, are ones that reflect an experience of frustration, annoyance, or irritation. You can see that as we go down the list, the kind of gradient or level of severity increases, right? So a person might be a little frustrated or annoyed. That's maybe not as strong a feeling of anger as teed off or livid. And maybe that's not quite as strong as irate or enraged. Similarly with fear, nervous or anxious are very common things that we experience quite frequently, but maybe often we're more than that. We're worried, we're in a cold sweat, we're panicked, we're terrified. So for your work with your teammates, you should understand that at every moment of our life, we're having an experience of the circumstances around us. And part of that experience is the feeling experience. Imagine if you went up to one of your salespeople and you said, you know what, we need to renegotiate our splits. And guess what? You're going to get less and I'm going to get more. Do you think that's a purely reason-based, non-emotional experience for the other person? Absolutely not. They're going to feel angry. Maybe they're going to feel fearful. Maybe they're going to feel nervous or anxious or worried about what that's going to mean to their future if they're going to be earning less on their splits with you going forward, for example. Or if you say to somebody, you know what, you haven't been doing so well with the leads I've been giving you, so I'm going to now give most of my leads over to Susan instead, and I'll give you a few others when I can. Same thing. They're likely to experience that as an experience of nervousness, anxiousness, fear, worry, some version of this experience of fear. And so what we want to say about fear is the experience that we have when we perceive risk. Let me repeat that because it's extremely important. Fear is the experience we have when we perceive risk. When we perceive risk to the things that are important to us, which might be our reputation, might be our bank account, might be our ability to support our family, send our kid to college, might be our actual personhood, our selfhood, right? Very often people will criticize something we do and we take it as them criticizing us as a human being, right? And so we feel defensive about that. We want to fight back and say, that's not fair, that's not right, I'm really not that way. And so we're having an experience of fear, some word underneath that category of fear. And the point is, you need to deal with that as a leader. You can't let that simply go over your head. It's real for that person. And so we need to find a way to perceive that it's happening and understand what's happening. We need to distinguish between the word, let's say, frustrated and nervous, or irritated and panicked, right? If you think someone's merely irritated, but they're really panicked, you're going to miss a huge point of what's happening for that person, and you're going to respond in a way that's probably not ideal. Let's keep moving. So dealing with defensiveness and anger, when the other person experiences anger, or especially fear, which is underneath the anger, they're very likely to get defensive. And you know what defensiveness looks like, right? They want to fight back. They start denying what you're saying. They're saying it's not true, or you don't get it. Or they might say something, well, what about you? You know, I'm not the only one that does that. You do too, right? In all these cases, this is a response to a perception of risk that they're having at that moment. So what do you do in that moment? Well, from an emotional intelligence point of view, there's a couple of things you can do. There's a lot of things you can do, but I'll share just a couple of them with you today. And maybe there's one here that you could pick that might be useful to you. You can think about this as kind of a cascade of steps you can take once you detect, that's perceive, and understand the anger or the fear that's underneath. First, once you detect defensiveness or anger, pause, take a timeout. Wherever it was that you wanted to go with this conversation, like maybe you did want to renegotiate the splits, or maybe you did want the person to know that they haven't been good enough, so you're not going to give them as many leads, or whatever it is, right? Once you detect that anger or that defensiveness, you need to pause, because the person is no longer able probably to be in a logical discussion with you about whatever it is you wanted to talk about. This is an interesting thing about emotion. When emotion reaches a certain level in our mind, and neuroscience now has confirmed this, people working in emotional intelligence have known this for decades, but it's recently been confirmed. When you perceive risk to a certain degree, your emotional architecture, which is lodged in the amygdala of your brain, actually has the capacity to overrule everything that happens in the prefrontal cortex, the seat of higher reasoning and analysis and calculation of math and all that stuff. And the reasoned discussion about what's right for business goes out the window, right? And you know this to be true already, right? When you are so angry about something that somebody says to you, you're really not in a place to have that nuanced discussion about what they're talking about, right? You're likely to say something like, I can't deal with this right now. I'm just so upset, right? And if they ask you, well, don't be upset, just let's talk about this. It may or may not be something that you're ready to do at that particular moment in time. Only when your emotional gradient goes down to a certain level are you able to actually get back into that conversation. So when you detect defensiveness or anger in another, pause right there. Recognize that at this moment, whatever your goal was for the conversation has to be set aside until you deal with this, or the other person can get back to a mode where they can actually have that conversation. Second, shift yourself to listening mode. Try to understand what's happening for the other person. Identify the emotion. And this is where the vocabulary comes in. Print out that sheet, put it on your wall, put it on your desk, put it on your phone, put it someplace where you can refer to it. And next time you observe somebody on television getting angry or defensive about something, next time you observe somebody in your office feeling that way, or someone in your family, pull it out and ask yourself, what emotion or emotions do I think best describe what I'm seeing here? Just look on the chart and just check them off mentally in your mind. This is emotional intelligence, is to be able to know that this person is fearful rather than sad, right? If you detect that someone's sad, but actually they're fearful, you're way off base. And worse than that, you're going to respond inadequately to them. Third, ask yourself, if they are fearful or angry, what is the perceived risk here? Is it a risk for them to their livelihood? Is it a risk to their physical safety? Is it a risk to their reputation? Is it a risk to some goal that they have for their future? As a leader, you should understand what's important to them and understand when something presents a risk to whatever it is that they value. If you don't understand what they value, what's important to them, and if you can't detect when something might be perceived as a risk by them to that, then you're going to just cause problems forever. You're never going to get over that hump with them. And remember, we're talking here about creating extraordinary relationships, not ordinary ones, not so-so ones, not pretty good ones, really good ones. Your team should be not just surviving, but thriving on the strength of extraordinary relationships. And that's what we want to help you with here. And finally, maybe you could say something You know what? I recognize that this might present a risk to, your goal of selling XYZ this year. Am I on base with that? Right? You might be willing to just address the situation with them. If their fear or anger is relatively mild on the chart there, they might be willing to enter into a conversation with you, not to problem solve, but for you to understand what they are experiencing. And so if you are able to recognize that, perceive that they're experiencing something, identify that perhaps there's some fear there, perhaps have some speculation about what the risk perception might be for them, you could test your theory. You could say, I know how important it is for you to earn, $150,000 in GCI this year, because I know that you need to send your kid to college next year. And it may be that, this may seem like it's putting that at risk. Am I on base with that? And they might say, yeah, bingo, that's it, sister. Right? Okay, so great. Then you can talk about it. This is addressing the need that comes up for them when they're presented with a situation that they perceive as full of risk. Now, let's go one step further. How about your own defensiveness or anger? Has there been a time in your life where you've been the one who's been a little bit triggered by something the other person said? Maybe as the leader of your team, maybe you heard somebody didn't think your way of leading was so good, or maybe a client called your expertise and judgment and knowledge into question sometime, or maybe somewhere in your personal life. How do you deal with your own defensiveness and anger? Well, very similarly. First, once you detect that's happening, pause. Whatever it was that you were working on is probably, you can put it off for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes while you try to examine what's happening for you. People who are highly emotional intelligent can do this on the fly in the moment, but it's really hard to do. It takes a lot of practice. And most people aren't that good at doing that in the moment. But you can certainly reflect afterwards. You can ask yourself a couple of questions. For example, what is the emotion that I'm experiencing? Go back to the vocabulary and say, which of these words best describes what I experienced? And remember, it could be 2 or 3 things, right? It could be anger and sadness, right? If Jenna got laid off because of COVID, she could be both angry and sad, right? So there's no reason why you can't choose 2 or 3 words off of that list. And sometimes 2 or 3 or even 4 words might also describe or completely describe what it is you're experiencing. This is why emotions are complex and difficult for us to understand. Emotional intelligence helps us make sense of all this whirlwind around in our mind. Next, what is the perceived risk that I'm thinking about here? If somebody says to me, I don't like the way you're running this team, they're, in a sense, you might be perceiving them as impugning your judgment as a human being or impugning your value as a human being. The risk to you is not just the reputation, but what if other people on my team start believing that I'm not a good leader because this person's saying I'm not a good leader, right? It's not just a risk to your reputation. It's a risk that some of these people might walk out the door. Some of your good producers or a very valued admin or somebody might walk out the door. And then where's your business, right? And very quickly, your mind can go from, uh-oh, so-and-so walks out the door. My business is going to collapse. I'm going to be living under a bridge with no money. Right? Very quickly, our brain just like races ahead, sometimes to the worst case scenario. That's perceived risk. Finally, how can you address that? Well, you might say, here's one way to address it from an emotional intelligent point of view. You know what? This is bringing up some stuff in me. Can you give me some time to work through it, and we'll pick this up tomorrow? What you're saying is, I'm experiencing something that I need to examine a little bit. And instead of allowing my emotion to dictate my behavior, I'm going to say, let's put the conversation aside for a little bit so I can manage my emotions a little bit and come back later when I'm ready to have the conversation. One goal of emotional intelligence is for you to be able to command your emotional experience rather than your emotional experience commanding you. And this is the problem, of course, that we have as human beings. So often our emotional experience is so powerful for us that we can't do anything other than become our emotion. I'm so angry right now that all I can do is lash out angrily. I'm so scared right now, all I can do is stand here like deer in the headlights, right? It's all I'm capable of doing at that moment. Emotional intelligence is a way for us to short circuit that or to reduce that gradient, the power of the experience of that, so that we can command our experience more effectively rather than having it command us. So a couple actions you can take this week. Use one element from what we've talked about today. Pull out the vocabulary list and look at it once or twice and apply it when you detect some emotion happening in a conversation anywhere in your life. Or think about the difference between thoughts and feelings and your ability to communicate the thought that you're having at a given moment in time, as well as feeling you might have. Focus on anger or fear when you're with somebody. When you detect anger and fear, that's the signal that you need to kind of change into emotional intelligence mode. And think about how you might respond to yours or others' experience. Okay, we're out of time. Let me pull this down. I'd like to just ask you guys quickly, what's something you want to keep in mind based on what we've talked about this morning as you go through these experiences going forward for you, either on your team or anywhere in your life? What's one thing that you want to keep in mind or apply going forward? Please put that into the chat box. What aspect of this do you want to think more about or apply? Yes, naming nuanced emotions, so important. It doesn't get us anywhere to say, I'm upset or I'm stressed. So important to be able to name, understand that emotion. The pause is so important, extremely valuable for you to be able to apply that pause at the right moment in time. And if you let these experiences go over your head for the other person, they're never, ever going to think of you as a person who's connecting to them, because the experience that they're having seems really divorced from the experience that you seem to be having of them. And remember what we said last week, people will not be influenced by you unless and until they feel related to by you. If you want to influence your team members positively and therefore your business, you have to have them feel related to by you. Or, as Chirag said yesterday, obsess over the experience of the people. Make them feel like they're more than just a transaction. Okay, thank you so much, everybody. Before we close, I'd like to have Chrissy just put up a quick poll, the same poll that we do with Chirag. We want to check how we're doing for everybody. We want to see how we can serve you better. It's our goal to obsess about your experience here. So please give us the feedback that we can use to make this experience better for you. Thank you, everyone. And we'll figure out why you're not getting the polls. Thank you. Chrissy, you can just make a note. Ann Lenzini says she doesn't get polls. Keith as well, maybe a couple other folks for some reason. Okay.
Okay, we'll figure that out. I'm thinking it's pop-ups, but we'll figure it out.
Oh, I'll check that right now.
Okay.
Check that they're not blocked. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Go out there, apply this stuff, recognize it's not easy, and none of us can do it perfectly, without a lot of practice. So go out and just start focusing on one thing, practice it for the next month or so. And I'm sure you'll be able to come back to the group or anybody else in the community and say, I had a win here because I applied one of these things. If you have any questions about this stuff, feel free to reach out to me. Happy to support you guys going forward. Question?
Yeah. So going forward, I mean, this has all been great. Can we do some for the leadership stuff also, like overall about like kind of planning the business with the team? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yes. We've got a whole host of things going forward. We want to work on building the culture of the team. We want to work on strategic planning with the team.
Yeah,
we
strategic planning.
We want to work on clarifying roles on the team. The strategic planning stuff is usually stuff that we do here at CSC towards the end of the year. Because as we're planning for the next year, that's when we want people to be thinking about where do we want to go and how do we need to organize ourselves? What are the things we need to keep in mind to plan the business for success in the new year?
Okay, cool.
And so, listen, we're open for feedback. I want to hear from any of you, any topic that you would like us to address in the future, put it in the chat box. And Chrissy's going to note all that stuff and we'll build sessions going forward for the stuff that matters most to all.
The other thing is like kind of training team, like doing the right training for team members so that they actually listen and do it, right? I mean,
Yep, got it. So yeah, so here's what I'm talking about, right? How do you influence people, right? You're saying, how do I influence them to listen to the things I want them to listen to, right? That's absolutely what we're talking about right here, right? People will not be influenced by you until they feel related to by you. And so a piece to that, not sufficient piece, certainly, is the emotional intelligence stuff we're talking about. And we will talk more about how you can do some of those things. So please continue to give us your feedback. Thank you for that. And all of you, please give us your feedback anytime. We want to add as much value as we can. Thank you, everybody, for your attention today. Looking forward to seeing you next week. Go out there and make the contribution that only you can. Have a great day.